and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. Flip to Genesis 11:4. It says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city in the tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. Bow our heads in prayer. Father God, I come to you in the mighty name of Jesus, Lord God. I come to you humbly, Lord God. I ask that you remove anything with me, Lord God. Just take me out of the way, move me out of the way completely, Lord. And let your spirit come through and speak through me, Lord God, so that everything that comes out of my mouth, Lord God, is from you and what you have for all of us to hear, Lord God. I thank you in advance for everything that we're doing, Lord God. I just ask that you decrease me and increase you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
You may be seated. 32. The reason why we selected 4 is because that was actually the key verse that spoke to the failure of man in this particular dispensation. So, with the dispensation of human government, we are now at a time frame right after the flood. And so in Genesis 8:20, we'll notice that this dispensation actually opens up at the altar. It begins at the altar, and it's the first time like the altar is actually like mentioned in the form of the word altar. So Noah's at the altar in 8:20. He built an altar, and he basically is giving his sacrifices, his thanks to God for bringing him through the flood. And at that moment, God is pleased with the rest that the world has come to. Everything has been destroyed with the exception of Noah's family and the animals that they had on the ark, and there's kind of like a sense of calmness and peace on the earth. And God's, that's what it meant when he said the Lord smelled a sweet savor. He also, at that moment, God decided that he made a promise that he would not do that again. He would not destroy the earth by flood again. As we read through chapter 9, he's making his covenant, which is the Noahic covenant, in which he makes a lot of promises and gives us commandments here. But in 21, he mentions that he will not curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. So he's basically saying he's not going to basically judge the whole world and flood the whole world and destroy the whole world, because man is going to fall anyway because of how we're born. We're born into sin. We have it in our hearts. So there's always going to be a fall. And so this was his promise to basically not condemn the whole world for a subset of the actions. So as in chapter 9, as he goes on to make this covenant with Noah, the first thing that he commands is for them to replenish the earth. So 9:1 says, and God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. That was the very first commandment he gave after the promise he made. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes when God speaks in the Bible and makes covenants and promises and things, some are conditional and some are unconditional. So conditional would mean, if you do this, then I will do this. So, for example, the scripture that says, if you delight yourself in the Lord, he will give you the desires of the heart. So that's conditional. He's saying, if you do this, I will do this. But then there are some that are unconditional and just simply says, this is what you're supposed to do. Yeah. In this case, they were supposed to replenish the earth. They were supposed to And that doesn't mean in one concentrated area. They were supposed to be fruitful and multiply and go out and scatter abroad. This is the very first thing he stated, and this is the very thing that they ended up not doing that led to the events in Babel. And I'm assuming most of us are familiar with the Tower of Babel and what happened there, but we will cover that because that is actually key in the ending of this particular dispensation. So the next commandment, or the next part of the covenant is if you all can recall, in the other dispensation we were talking about initially in the Edenic dispensation, how everything was at peace in the Garden of Eden and the animals were created and everything was in harmony. Well, here in verse 2, he says, "And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered." So here, the harmony is now taken away. If you notice, it happens after they have come out of the ark and everything, because I mean, they obviously would need the harmony in the ark while they're in there with all the animals. Mm-hmm. But once they come out and God starts to give his covenant, he basically takes that harmony away. And now animals fear us. And he says, and they are delivered into our hands. The other part of the relationship of animals that have changed is now, as you go on to read a little further, in 3, animals are now allowed into man's diet. So now we can eat animals. It's key that you can't eat the blood of the animal, so they had to go through a process to drain what they call the lifeblood of the animal, and basically pull that out of an animal that had blood before they ate it, but they are now allowed to eat animals. Also, capital punishment is put in place, and this is like the main reason why it's called the dispensation of human government, because now you have a governmental rule that's in place. So if we jump down to 5, and it said, let's jump down to 5. It says, "And surely your blood of your lives will I require, at the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. At the hand of every man's brother will I require the life of man. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man." So now we have capital punishment established and the governmental rule established, where not just man but animal. If any man or animal, any man or beast takes the life of a man, now their life is supposed to be taken, a life for a life. Paul actually goes on to give us the ideal description of human government in Romans 13, 1 through 7. Mm-hmm. So if we skip to there really quick. And I'm really not going to be before you long. And actually, one of the things to note is that this dispensation, the last one we covered, was a very long one. It was like over 1,600 years. This dispensation from flood to the events in Babel was only 429 years. So it's actually a lot shorter time frame. So if we go to Romans 13, 1 through 7, it reads, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God." And I wish I actually had this in my phone, because the Amplified goes it's a little bit clearly stated. But basically, what he's saying is that we should all be subject to the powers of government. Because those powers, all of the the rulers of government ideally are ordained and selected by God. And so they're basically enforcing God's commandments. And so therefore, if you go on, it says, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So this is one of the key reasons why it says obey the laws of the land, because the laws of the land are established by the powers of government. The powers of government are supposed to be following and being guided and have been selected by God. And so if all of these things are proper and in order, then we should have no problem following the laws of the land. Because if we don't, then in essence, we are resisting God, because that's where they have trickled down from. And that's where they're being enforced from. Everybody follow that? So, verse 3 says, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Verse 5 reads, wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. And then it goes on to speak about rendering your dues and your tributes and your taxes and things of that nature, and honor and such. So Paul has given us the description of God's intention for our governmental system. And if all of these things were to take effect, then capital punishment, which was put in place, is in essence uncorrupt. Makes sense? So how Pastor has referred to, and all of us know of the different things that are going on in the world as far as the things with police and the presidential elections and things of that nature. If everything was lined up the way that it would be intended, then our governmental system would rightfully be set in place to protect us and to keep order as opposed to causing chaos. So one of the key things to understand, and it is really clear and stated towards the end of this, is that when we fail to listen to God and follow his instructions and his commandments, we are walking into and leading to come to us chaos, turmoil, sorrow, confusion. All of these things are coming from that disobedience. When we're not following the instructions he said, we're inviting all of this into our lives, and we're essentially walking right into it as well. That's what when Pastor read, was it First Chronicles? Yes. Second Chronicles 7 and 14. What that in essence is saying is that if we get right, it'll all fall into place. If we're doing right, we're doing everything that we're supposed to do, it'll all fall into place. And that's what Paul was describing. If the powers that be are doing what they're supposed to do, and they're truly ordained by God, and nobody's corrupt at the top, then the laws that fall into place and the judgment from those laws are uncorrupt. There is no situation where someone is, falsely imprisoned, or where someone is put to death and they should not have been. Amen. Because there's no corruption. Everything is following God's plan and is being led and ordained by God. My God. So that was the intention of this dispensation. So, as we said, capital punishment is put in place. And also another thing is, God shifts and he begins to speak to the head of the family. So now, Noah is the head and he's speaking directly to Noah, and then as they spread out, he's speaking to the heads of each family, because now these families are becoming nations and they're responsible for building nations all across the earth. So he changes from speaking to one individual to now he's dealing with everyone from the head. And then the head is responsible, now has the responsibility of the family. So that's how the stewardship is set up. So, as I mentioned, the responsibility was to replenish the earth, scatter, and be fruitful and multiply. As we go on to read, corruption starts to come in. Because remember, Noah was selected to basically have the responsibility of building the ark. He was hand selected by God. So there was something appealing about him. He was pleasing in God's sight. Well, as we go on, 9 and 21 states that, and he, speaking Noah, I'll jump up to 20 so that we can reference Noah. Genesis 9 and 20 says, and Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. So now we start to see several things. We start to see sin is introduced again. We're also seeing, once again, a shift in the family. So, in the Edenic dispensation, in the dispensation of innocence, where now we had blood being shed within the family, now we're seeing another shift of that nature where you have the father who is the head. Sin is now entering into him. And it affects the children, because in 22 it says, and Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. So then 23 says, and Shem and Japheth, the other two kids, took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. So we have a full scenario here of siblings and a father. So you have a father that's drunken, and he's in sin. He's shamed himself because now he's drunken and naked and uncovered, and the youngest son, the first son, goes in and sees him and basically comes out and tells the brothers. But as I studied this, the key thing is when he came and told them, he was basically making a mockery out of his father. So now you have disrespect introduced, because he doesn't respect him because of the drunken state and the things that he was doing. So now you're having a detachment within the family, and the head is now not acting in the sense that the head is supposed to be, and so now there's dissension within the family. However, the other two siblings had enough respect for him still. They basically stayed in their lane. So one of the things that we tend to do, and kids, listen, one of the things that we tend to do is we feel like it's okay for us to have a lack of respect to a parent or someone in authority because of how they're operating. And we fail to keep in mind what we're commanded to do. So, in essence, we're supposed to honor thy mother and thy father. We're supposed to respect thy mother and thy father. It doesn't mean That's not conditional. Remember how we talked about conditional and unconditional? Now, granted, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in a place that is abusive if there are other options and things of that nature, but it's still commanding you to have a certain level of respect and honor. But that's what Ham did not do. He basically felt like, why should I respect him? He laying out drunk, naked, such. Go look at that. And the other two brothers basically stayed in their lane, did what they were supposed to do as individuals, and even though their father had stepped out of pocket and wasn't lining up with God's actions, they didn't allow that to make them do the same. They did what they were supposed to do and was honorable and respectful, and basically walk in backwards so that they wouldn't basically be a witness to that and introduce that sin into them, and covered him up so that no one else could see it. Follow?
Amen.
Okay. Kids, did y'all pay attention to that?
I did.
Amen.
They're asleep.
Oh, Lord Jesus. So in verse 24, Noah wakes up. He knows what happened. He recognizes what Ham did. And now Ham and his line is cursed. On the other end of that, Shem and Japheth, they are blessed because of their actions. So Genesis 10, at the end of 9, Noah passes away. And then Genesis 10 starts to go through the genealogy. And as you go through the genealogy, you get to Nimrod. So Nimrod is like the great-grandson of Noah and like the grandson, I believe, of Ham. Remember, Ham's line is cursed. They're the Canaanites. They end up being the Canaanites because Canaan is one of Ham's descendants. But Nimrod is key because he's mentioned here in 10. If you read, we'll jump to 10 and 8. It says, and Cush begat Nimrod. And if you go up a little higher, you'll see how Cush fell in line from Ham. It says, he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Wherefore it is said, even as Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So, and it actually goes on to say, out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh and Rehoboth and Calah. So Nimrod, initially reading, I'm like, oh, well, he's a hunter. It says he was, what did it say? Before the Lord. So I'm like, oh, you know, he's a good guy, da, da, da. But as I dug into it and studied, I realized that what they were implying is actually the opposite. So Nimrod, the translation of that is the rebel. And when it says that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and that he was a mighty one in the earth, and then it spoke of all of his kingdom, in the beginning of his kingdom, what it meant was he was basically a conqueror. He went out and he was a hunter of men and land. So he was basically conquering land and building a kingdom. And he didn't fear man, nor did he fear the Lord. So that's why I said before the Lord. So he is now one that is very big in the earth. Mm-hmm. He was feared. People looked at him like, oh, you know, he's like equivalent to God. Like nobody's looking, like he doesn't fear God at all. He doesn't answer to God. He's doing what he wants to do. And so as you go on, and it mentions that Babel was one of his conquered cities. It was a part of his kingdom. And we jump to 11 and 4, which talks about what happened in battle. So remember, the very first commandment was that they were supposed to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth. So they were supposed to be scatter abroad. And 11:1 says, and the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. So at this time, there's no confusion there as far as communication. Everybody spoke the same language. Everybody could be on the same page. And verse 4 says, and they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name. And very important, it says, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. So they knew that they were doing this and being disobedient. It wasn't like they were doing it and thought back like, oh crap, God did say so and so. No, they knew what they were doing. Like, hey, let's go build this tower because we know we're supposed to go scatter and go abroad, but let's do this instead. So verse 5 says, and the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. It is amazing how it is undeniable how much we can accomplish if we get on one accord. The problem is we always get on one accord for the wrong stuff.
True.
It's like when Moses came down from the mountain, they was all on one accord, but they worshiping idols